Hey everybody, you're listening to the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Bill Zanowitz.
I'm Bryan Pittard.
And I'm Steve Morey.
And we are honored to have as a special guest with us Caleb Alexander-McKinzie from the Southern Fried Geekery podcast. And we're all gathered. Well, first say hi, Caleb. Sorry.
No, you're good. Hi, everybody.
Hey. And we just wanted to get an episode out. The time that we're actually recording this is on Thursday, March 19th. And we released an episode tonight. But we decided that we're going to be recording on a fairly regular basis these sort of sequestration episodes due to a number of people, but that's a weird way to put it, but almost everybody within our listening audience, I think, has been affected by social distancing to one degree or another. And, you know, it's nice that we have this mechanism to get together to talk to each other in what is, I think, a very trying and unknown terrain time. So I'll start with our guest, Caleb. You know, how are you coping with everything?
Bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
So far. No, so I'm a full-time law student, and while we have completely transitioned to working online, to doing classes via LegalZoom and all that fun stuff, it's different because I'm not necessarily leaving my house, but I'm still seeing everybody I'm in class with. I'm still communicating regularly with my fellow students and with my professors, and the workload is enough that it just, you know, when you're constantly having to read cases and to work on briefs and do memos and read and take notes for class on top of all the comics and everything else that I read, it's not been that big of a struggle for me because I'm forced into stimulation. I'm forced to do things because I have deadlines. I have tests. I have quizzes, and next week is going to be interesting because that's actually spring break for me. So I won't have those things. So I'm curious to see how I do next week.
And Brian, how about you, since you're close to what was the and now a epicenter?
It's weird because I thought we were like ahead of the curve, but people are catching up. And in fact, like other cities and states are actually like going past, I think, where we're at least in terms of the reaction, if not the numbers. I think we're still highest out here in Seattle for deaths, certainly, but also number of cases. But I mean, again, that's because I think we were the one of the first, if not the first. But it's weird. Social distancing has been kind of in effect for the last week or so here. And I was told to go telework about last Wednesday. And before that, you could sort of see the writing on the wall as things are starting to get a little scarier. But I don't know. It's weird. Like it's like my job. Thankfully, I haven't been laid off. I work for the government, and we've been very able to not only continue paying everybody, but also work distance. Though they have basically told me if I need to come into the base, they will put me back on in the rotation if they need me. So it's I still have to potentially go back to work physically, but my command in Orlando, they just got told to telework this week. You know, my friends all over, my educator friends are all basically like in the same boat where they're either working from home on whatever they can, or my mom just called me earlier and she's asking me how to do a doc cam hookup to her computer so she can teach math, and just it's all over the place. So it's funny though. So those of us who are from Florida or from states that have had hurricanes, at first this felt very familiar, but with a hurricane, we know that there's an end date, unless it's like sitting there spinning out in the Atlantic, which has certainly happened. But like overall, we know what it's like to hoard or have problems buying things like toilet paper or whatever. So it's familiar, but yet this is like, not going to just stop anytime soon. So it's familiar, but very weird and different. So I don't know. Overall, it's been okay. We're not doing bad here. In spite of it looking like Seattle is the hot zone that it is, I don't think it's really that bad. I think it's just that we're ahead of the game on testing, and with the elder care facilities that were really the epicenter of all of this here. Without those in the mix, we would have numbers probably comparable to anywhere else. I think it's just that the rest of the country is finally catching up on testing And that's still an issue. One of my friends in Atlanta just told me, he's got pneumonia, he's got fever, he's got all the symptoms, but they cannot test him because there's just not enough swabs. There's just not enough testing kits out there in all the areas that need to be. And because he's like in his 20s or 30s, maybe, I don't remember how old he is, like, he's not high risk. So they're like, here, we'll treat you and go home. So it's weird.
Steve, how about you?
Well, this is it's kind of funny and also kind of sad, and I'm not going to start singing. But since I work from home most of the week anyway, 4 days a week, I'm here in my home office. The only difference that I've really had is the fact that on Wednesdays, I'm no longer driving into Charlotte to go and be at the office. Last week, my office manager basically told me, you do not have to come back in for the next month. And so I haven't been back. Unfortunately, my LCS is in Charlotte, so I'm a couple weeks behind on my my usual subscriptions, my usual books. So I'm going to try. Hopefully, they will still be open this weekend, so I'm going to try to drive into the city, pick up my books, and then head back, because I do want to continue to support my comic shop any way I can, especially smaller comic shops are pretty vulnerable at this time, because it's a very much an in-person kind of service. I know some stores have been able to do sort of curbside pickup of books, and and that's great if you can do that, but comic book stores, just like any other retailer that has a lot of different things like a bookstore, they really depend on that foot traffic, on those those eyeballs browsing the shelves. And so I kind of want to help out there where I can, for my subscriptions anyway, if I can. But otherwise, it's being here in Winston, it's been a little bit surreal. We live in pretty much a pretty quiet part of town anyway, and it's a small city, so it's never really been super busy. But going to the grocery stores last weekend was pretty eye-opening. At the Aldi's down the street from me, even the canned goods aisles were completely bare, which what Bryan said about hurricane preparedness, I mean, that's what I've experienced too. And usually you don't have people, going crazy buying, clearing off shelves like this. I mean, the bread aisle, the milk aisle, and eggs, and toilet paper, those usually disappear. But, canned tomatoes is, and rice and beans, I mean, that's not something that usually is completely out everywhere. So it's been interesting. But, the one good thing I think for my husband, who teaches, is that he's been able to, take care of a lot of the projects around the house that he's been having to put off because of all the other work that he's had to take or that he has been taking when teaching and all that. Since that's not a factor right now, we've got a lot of stuff getting done, which is cool.
Well, I'm getting nothing done on that front, because since we started with remote work on Friday, I've been pulling every day has been an 11 or 12-hour day. The project I'm currently staffed on, I'm supervising 11 people, and I've never had to do that remotely before. It's just been an intense couple of days. It's, at this point, it's Thursday, right? So it's been 5 business days since we started this, and there isn't a point in any of those days at 7 o'clock where I'm just a zombie for 15, 20 minutes, after I can finally log off. And even some of those nights it went well past 7. I'm hoping that once we get our rhythm with that, I anticipate that it'll be a little easier. Today, I was ready to make some kind of tongue-in-cheek complaining about working from home, an aspect of working from home. And then just as I was checking my feed on Facebook, I see 2 friends of mine in the last 36 hours got laid off. And it's easy to not see that when you can't see it. I don't know, we're just in unprecedented times, and I have to say I was really shaken by John Oliver's program on Sunday, not just because that it was in front of basically a white background with no audience, but him saying something that I think really rang true because of the lack of leadership in our country and the lack of truthful information at pivotal press conferences, that we're kind of on our own in this. And I really do credit many of the nation's governors for providing something. We shouldn't be where we are right now. I don't know. Like, I'm not a germaphobe. It's a little weird now that I go from that to washing my hands like Lady Macbeth, after. Um,
Out, damn
anything.
spot.
We'll get through this. We have to.
Have you had to engage anybody in your spheres about the whole, oh, this isn't that much worse than the flu? Have you guys had that debate or seen that
I had
yet?
one debate with some idiot who went to TBRU.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Which to me was just baffled me. Those kind of events are like, petri dishes as it is.
Right?
That they would subject themselves to that is just, it just puzzles me.
I got into it with a musician friend who admittedly, in this case, he has a day job, so he's a musician who does play bars, and I'm sure he's losing a healthy amount of his livelihood, but he has a day job that he can probably do from home. And he posted it and shared and made this whole thing, and I'm like, you're missing the point. It's not the mortality rate, it's the transmission rate.
Yeah.
And even if you don't have to worry about your own health and safety and your immediate family, like, if you have your parents are still alive, if you have friends and family who are immunocompromised or have they're the ones who we're trying to protect in all this, and it's maddening to me that we have to even make that case. And in Florida, oh my God, I'm so glad I'm not in Florida anymore. They weren't even canceling spring break. They had beaches still running, and beaches, admittedly, okay, yeah, people are out in the open air. I hope that they're not all, hands all over each other. But spring break, they are. People are being stupid and passing shit around. So it's it's just remarkable. You have to explain this and remind people and get the word out, and just it's been kind of exhausting to see that. And I thankfully haven't seen anyone I know, like you said, Bill, that have passed away, but knowing people, both of my parents are in that high risk group, and other people in my family who are immunocompromised, no, it's don't mess around with this, to stay home. It's an inconvenience for a lot of us, and for some of us, it's a severe hardship, but it's necessary. And unfortunately, I don't think it's something that everyone's like, oh, it's going to be a few weeks or a month. It's that's not.
No, I mean, we may be getting back to some semblance of normal, say 4 to 8 weeks, I think. But this is going to be with us for 18 months at the very least.
Easily.
Yeah.
Easily.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about people who are at high risk, I think that one of the reasons why it's hitting me so hard is, on paper, I'm technically high risk. Now, I'm over 50, despite how gorgeous I am. I am over 50.
And in great shape, too. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Though it's not type 1, I am diabetic. So there's a heightened awareness of what's going on within my surroundings right now. And it's not a comfortable feeling. It really isn't.
Well, and not to add to the fear tactics of it all, but when we think of terms like high risk and the people who may be affected, you also have to consider that that's not factoring in the peak of the bell curve. When we talk about flattening the curve and everything else, I'm 32. I'm not somebody who's technically high risk for this, but here's the thing. I'm also not at high risk from dying of the flu. If your ERs are jammed up, if the doctors don't have the equipment, if the respirators aren't there, then the threshold for what is considered high risk lowers, because you can't, you don't have the access to the equipment and to the treatment that everyone needs. And so that's the whole point of self-isolation and of, working from home and everything is to flatten that curve, because when you do that, that makes it it makes it feasible for the doctors to be able to treat patients who need treated, and to lower that rate. And I think that's the important part. And again, that's not to, if everything gets jammed up and flooded, all the hospitals get overtasked and overworked. We don't have the swabs, we don't have whatever. That's when crisis really begins to show. But we don't have to hit that point. If everybody just, common sense may not be common, but we all have to tap into it once in a while. So if everybody just maintains kind of a clear head and look, like you said, make some sacrifices, do some do some things that you wouldn't normally do. Become very okay with sitting alone in a room with yourself for a little bit. We will never hit that point. My husband's an RN. He luckily is not an ER nurse, but he's came into contact with 3 people this week that are suspected of potentially having it. We'll find out sooner or later whether or not they do have it in the next day or two. But so I come home to my husband every day. So on the off chance that maybe we have come in contact with it, I'm just not going and doing anything. I'll watch some concerts. I'll read some comics. I'll hang out on the internet. I'll chat on Facebook. I've been trying to do a really good job about, while the rest of the world is panicking, putting out some positivity out there, letting people know what's happening in your community. The VAN, which is the nonprofit that I'm associated with, we're taking steps to ensure that if this hits the unsheltered and the homeless community, that we can have options for them. And I know other nonprofits and other people who focus on that in Little Rock and in the surrounding areas are doing that as well. So people are doing good work, and that's the thing, is that you have to remember that the world has not come to a screeching halt. That there are good people doing good things. I think going out of this, hopefully we're going to appreciate our teachers and our educational system more, that promote that the positivity that can come out of this bad situation. And I think when you put that out for people to see, that it does kind of make people stop and take a breath and realize that this is momentary. This is momentary. It's just it's a lapse in normalcy, but we will get back to it. And so as long as we don't lose ourselves in the fear, that we can make lemonade out of these lemons, to use a really terrible cliche, because that's all I got right now.
Mine was always a little bit more vile, with chicken salad out of chicken shit.
That must be a New Jersey thing, because my boss says the exact same thing, and he's also from Jersey.
Yeah, I think it is one of those Jersey things, like not for nothing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I said it the other day in a group chat with our friend Hassan, and he was like, "I've never heard that before, and I'm stealing it."
Spread the sayings.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that you did hit on, Caleb, while you were talking was, about spreading positivity. And there's, one thing that I've been really inspired by is people engaging through the internet, of doing something to get people's minds off of things. I mean, I think the most amazing thing was seeing 11 million streams of the Dropkick Murphys concert.
And it was a good concert too. What was great is there was one guy in the audience, and his name was Jimmy, so they were just talking to Jimmy the whole time, and it worked so well.
Well, it did. And I know there's been others. Ben Gibbard has been doing bedroom sessions. I understand Rufus Wainwright tonight is starting. I think he killed his. What did he say, Rob? Robe? I guess that's what we're kind of doing in this some little capacity, is, engaging each other. And if people are listening in, engage with us on one platform or another, whether it's an IM or. One thing I said to everybody before we started was, I know there's people out there who have very robust social lives, but maybe by themselves right now. And that must be really hard to take. For all 4 of us, we have somebody at home to bounce things off. And yeah, you don't do a cameo here. Go. Bye-bye.
Poor Rob.
Poor
Wow.
Rob.
Ouch.
Kicking him out of the room.
So something I said first day of, I guess, where everything really gelled was, if you think for half a second that somebody would benefit from you reaching out to check in on them, if you think for half a second they would, then they would. If you are listening, do that. Just make sure you check in on your friends and your family who may not have the support system within the shelter that you're in that some other people have. So again, this is a comic book podcast, and comic books are just as valid a form of escapism as people who are running Netflix day in, day out at this moment, or some other thing. So we've each picked a comic book that we wanted to talk about, and we are nothing if not gracious to our guests. So I will start with Caleb. Caleb, what is something that you're reading that you're digging?
So I read an OGN today that really, I'd been looking forward to reading it because I'm friends with the artist. Fortunately, a great guy. And it's been sitting by my chair. And as I do my homework, as I read for school and everything, it's always just kind of right there waiting on me. And today at about 5:05 was officially the start of my spring break. Of course, it was the first thing I picked up. And this, the book is called A Letter to Joe, and it comes from Top Shelf Productions. This book is written by a individual named Joseph Siraki, and it's drawn by Kelly Williams, who I'm not only a huge fan of, but like I said, fortunately, we've gotten to be really good friends over the past few years. He's a fellow Arkansasian, so it's great seeing him finally get a little bit more mainstream recognition because he deserved it. He's an incredible artist, somebody that doesn't make sense that he's not doing larger scale work. And this book, I think, is really going to put him on the map the way that his other work has yet to do. Just a kind of a brief overview of the story, because like I said, it's an OGN, so it's a little bit thicker. Essentially, Joseph Siraki's grandfather. It's a memoir in a way. It's not the writer's personal story, but it's the story of his grandfather. His grandfather was a World War II soldier. He was their soldier in the U.S. Army fighting against the Germans, and he was drafted when he was 18 years old. He didn't sign up. It was one of those things that he was forced to go fight into a war, but it fortunately was a battle he could believe in. But before he left his last year of high school, he met this woman. He met this young girl named Jo that was in the same grade. They were both the same age, and he kind of became infatuated with her, and it was almost a love at first sight kind of thing. And so as soon that they got engaged, they were planning on being married, and then he was drafted. He had to go overseas and fight. So they did what people in that era did. They wrote letters back and forth, and because he was on some of the front lines, because he was in some of the places where they didn't want the Germans to find out where they were, he had to be very vague. He had to be very coy with the information that he was sending out. But in 1945, he was able to get out a letter that was uncensored to Jo, and it was a rather long letter. It was about 9 pages long, and it essentially laid out his entire story. It told his gal back home everything that he had kind of been through, and his experience going from boot camp and going through Europe when he had first gotten overseas before he actually saw any real combat. Meeting the people in his platoon and seeing how people were, from areas spread out all over the U.S. And the story does a really cool thing. It's not only a wartime story, but it blips back in to show you what Joe's doing back in the real world. And it reminds you that it juxtaposes her fear and her anxiety over the person that she wants to marry, the man she's in love with, being overseas in danger, and his fear and anxiety, which same emotions, but a completely different concept when you're on the front lines of battle. And it's not a story that, so this isn't necessarily a Garth Ennis war story. There is some violence, but it's not overly gratuitous. It still reminds you it's a very human story, and it's in many ways it's a story about PTSD. In many ways, it's about the story of developing PTSD and the things that lead towards that, and the relationships that help people overcome it. So interesting. Joseph Siraki did play with some of the narrative a little bit. He embellished some things, and he's very honest about it, because he wanted to make this a story that really, it's more than necessarily black and white. He talks about how at the time the Army was segregated, but Latinx, specifically Puerto Rican soldiers, were quote unquote considered white, and so they were stuck into the same platoons, but still faced an incredible amount of racism. The main character in the story befriends a man he's Puerto Rican, and they had this moment where he says, well, why are you here? And he says, well, your last name is Saraki, right? That's Polish. And he says, yeah. He's like, well, why are you here? We're from the same country. We both come to this country by the way of a history, a genealogy, but we're both Americans. And that really speaks to the spirit and the camaraderie that can be, that is not necessarily what we think of when it comes to World War II, especially some of the older generations, or even now. I've got friends in the military now, and racism still very much alive and well everywhere. But as it goes to the story, you kind of see this main character start to sink in to what they call shell shock, and he keeps writing letters home to Joe, and he holds on to the one thing that's really anchoring him to sanity, to his humanity, as other soldiers lean into other vices, be it women in the town that they meet, as they liberate Paris at one point, and he kind of sinks into alcohol a little bit, but he goes about it in a way that he's still got an anchor in Joe, and she's doing her best at home to maintain, to give him what he needs as she's sending letters back, not knowing at any point in time if they're getting to her. And in the end, it is a happy love story. Obviously, their grandson is the one who's writing it, so they do reconnect. They do live happily ever after. They have 3 kids, and those 3 children have very different relationships with their parents. But it's just an incredibly human story, and it's one that I think iceberg theory plays a lot into it. It shows you the 10%, but it hints to the 90% underneath the water that's there, and it does a very good job. And Kelly's art's outstanding. Like I said, I'm biased because I do have a genuinely friendly relationship with Kelly, but his sequentials are just, they're breathtaking. He works in watercolor, so his art has a very fluidic feel to it, and he knows just when to give that kind of visual break in the story. You'll have an action sequence where your main character's in the midst of battle, and he's in a tight spot, and he's seeing just the carnage of war, and then it just for really no reason except for really good craft elements, it flashes back and it shows you what Joe's doing in front of a typewriter, and how her family's coming to her and is like, you should go on dates, like, we know you love him, but you have to live your life. And as they're both trying to make their way through a world that's in very different ways, but very very real ways and very valid ways, combative towards them, they find solace in each other, in the idea of each other, really. And that reconciliation really hits home. They do a really good job showing that. Showing. I mean, emotionally, this is all over the map. It's like it's like watching a heartbeat, because you'll be on the edge of your seat one moment as they're in it's D-Day. They're on the beach at Normandy, and the next moment it's a quiet dinner between 3 girlfriends having tea, trying to get their minds off of the wartime struggle here in the States. The pacing could have very easily been off. It could have been very easily been one of those things that the writer and the artist lose control of, but they've got such a tight grip on it. It really is one of my favorite things that I've read so far this year. It's very much, we all do those lists at the end of the year. I'll be hard pressed not to have this as my favorite OGN. So again, it's called A Letter to Joe, from Top Shelf. Check it out. I highly encourage it.
That actually, I've seen that at one of the local stores, and I actually was interested in picking it up. But thank you for the recommendation there, because I do like that very much. Not necessarily autobiographical, although in this case it is adapted by from his grandfather's letters, I guess. So it's not really the author writing it, but interpreting it, and that has just as much impact because, of course, he's interpreting it looking back knowing kind of what became of his grandfather and grandmother's relationship, obviously, because he's there, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
he's because he exists, then things kind of turned out for the best. But no, that's a really interesting perspective to have, and
Well,
pretty cool.
it's also neat because he's very honest about who his grandfather was. Like he's not sugarcoating anything. This is a man who lived through war. His grandfather was an alcoholic. At one point, he talks about his grandfather's relationship with his father. He said, my dad thinks he was an abusive asshole. My aunt was daddy's darling. My uncle was the hippie fuck up that didn't understand his kid. So he's very honest about the different relationships that his father had later on, that his grandfather had later on in life. His grandfather was a chain smoker. His grandfather was very set in his ways. He didn't like to talk about the war, but he liked to talk about valiancy. At one point, Joseph in his epilogue kind of talks about how he's not his grandfather. He's very much not that person, but he couldn't be who he is. And I'm trying to be vague because I want people to go out and read the story. But he couldn't be who he is without the man that his grandfather was, that influence. And it's neat getting that, not a filtered perspective, but that kind of connectivity through our families. Because, I think us, especially considering the podcast that we're doing right now, we're all gay men. Queer people in general have a very interesting familial dynamic. Sometimes it's a lot easier than others, but, my father personally is a Church of Christ preacher. I come from a very religious family. We don't get along all that often, but I wouldn't be who I am were it not for my father being who he was, and for his father being the very Quaker-like figure that he was. And that legacy is there. And I think it's important that we explore that, and we explore that as it influences our personal lives and our public lives and the culture that builds up around it.
Caleb, that's a fantastic overview. I had not heard of this piece, but now I'm actually really interested in getting it. So I think that's a great choice.
One of the things that really intrigued me when you had mentioned you were going to be talking about this book, Caleb, was the nature of a romance set against a backdrop which is the antithesis of romance.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that definitely hits my buttons. I'm really intrigued to check this out.
It's really well balanced. Really well balanced.
Okay, well, let's move over to something very different. Let's throw it over to Bryan. Bryan, what's the book that you want to talk about?
So after that, I don't feel as good about my choice now. No, here's the thing. I will be quite frank and honest, and I've talked about this on the show before. My relationship with comics has changed. I am no longer near my LCS. In fact, on the opposite coast. I have to decide what I am going to continue subscribing to in the future and what format that is. I also sold my comic book collection, which I actually don't think I've talked about. So I have a short box now full of the comics that I kept. Although I did go to my LCS before I left, actually when I went back to Orlando and saw my back issues out in circulation. They had been put up on shelves, and I talked to the guy going through them, and we were having this really weird, nerdy conversation about collecting and how you organize things. And anyway, long story short is my comic book reading has dropped precipitously before my move and then since. However, I am still very interested in keeping up with things, and specifically the big two, but also interesting stuff like Ghosted from Cena, and really anything else that comes up. So I'm hoping to not completely lose connection. I don't have an LCS out in Seattle, but I will eventually. But I am still getting books back from Orlando.
I was gonna say, don't you have a lot of choices out there?
Oh, I'm sure. I'm not in an area that is limited by any means, but I'm also sort of torn between the whole just going all digital. It's that whole intersection of things. And anyway, point is, I am keeping up with the X books because, as we all know, if you listen to the show for more than a few episodes or back, ways, I love Jonathan Hickman. He can do no wrong. So when he decided to take on the X books, I was very, very, very happy. And thus far, mostly I've been very happy, and certainly with his core book and anything he's attached to directly. Some of the extraneous is a Freudian choice there. Some of the side books, some of the connected books, I don't love as much. I haven't dropped any of them. I'm actually still getting all of them. However, there's very quickly going to be a necking down of books that I continue to read, and I think some of them are going to get culled. But the Cable #1, it just came out from Gary Duggan and Phil Noto. Significant for many reasons. First of all, it's got Cable in it. Not that that's new. We've had many Cable books by now, but Phil Noto does not do a lot of sequential art, although he's done a lot more in the last, couple of years than he used to, having previously done mostly covers and pinups and all that stuff. But I love Phil Noto. He's such a sweet gentleman, great comics artist, a very unique style. I'm sure there's other artists that are similar, but I'll let you go Google and see what you think. But he is working on this with Jerry. And Jerry Duggan is also the guy doing Marauders, which is one of my other favorite of the recent X books since the relaunch. So when I realized he was doing a Cable book, I was like, well, yeah, I'm going to read that. I mean, I'm a Cable fan from back in the day, certainly collecting comics in the 90s. We all remember when the Cable came out, and for those of us who were young and impressionable and liked her suit graying, muscle-bound figures, we all attached ourselves very quickly. Mm-hmm. And yeah, someday I aspire to be a Cable, not current incarnation, but the original. Because of course, if we've been reading X books for the last couple of years, the Cable is now a child. Young Nate Summers, I guess. I've lost the bubble on where he falls in the timeline. Like I know he's like
that's unheard of for an X book.
I know,
unheard
seriously.
of.
But no. He's somewhere like post-adolescence. I think he's in his maybe 20s. It's a really hard thing to pin down, as Cable would be, you'd expect, right?
Well, it's one of those things that Hickman kind of got stuck with. He was, in previous storylines, just right before Dawn of X, they ended up killing off old Cable and bringing back young Cable because of the young X-Men. So it's just so confusing how they did that, and unfortunately, Hickman got stuck with him.
But he got stuck with a lot of things, and he's not been. It's not been a problem with the current incarnation of anything. You know what? We're gonna res him, and he's gonna be old man Cable because that was his best version. So they've consciously kept with it. But what I love, and has anyone else read this before I spoil away?
I haven't, but spoil away, please.
Spoil away.
Same boat.
All right. So here's the deal. It's what you think it's going to be. It's a great little Cable book. It's got him running around with his cohorts, most notably Armor, and I don't honestly, Pixie, I think, and I don't remember the green kid's name. Honestly, I'm terrible. There's so many mutants now. It's a what is it? Problem that there's so many, but it's not a bad problem. Anyway, he's running around and he's having adventures on Krakoa. He goes to Monster Island, which is the sort of sister island, I think, to Krakoa. He fights a big lion, which is well drawn by Phil Noto, because everything is well drawn by Phil Noto. And they pull out a sword, and the sword is related to Rom. Was it the Micronauts?
Yeah, they can't call him Rom now. They still can use Space Knights. So.
Well, and so it's even more kind of indirect. They call the planet. I had to Google this because I collected comics starting in the 90s. I missed the ROM era. Certainly am familiar enough with it to know when I see it, but so it's yes, and it does say Space Knight, a Space Knight named Morn. So it's not ROM per se, but the Light of Galador, which is the planet that the ROM stuff sort of comes from. And you have this gorgeous 3 or 4 page Space Knight adventure, and it's all baked into this sword that Cable pulls out of this space lion. And so yeah, they're gonna bring in all the cool ROM Space Knight stuff into the X books, which I don't, again, have a strong connection to, but like seeing Phil Noto draw that and sort of understanding that there's like the cyborg component to Rom and there's the cyborg component to Cable. It's like, this is a idea that I'm surprised no one's done previously. It's a great match, you know, it's a great fit. So that's all fantastic. Like that's like most of the episode, most of the issue is that. But what really sold the deal, and I need to figure out if this is Phil Noto or some other artist. I think it's possibly another artist, but there's a couple pages at the back. I think it's like 3 pages, and it's in a very different style. So I wouldn't be shocked if it's not, and I don't recognize the style right off the top of my head. But it's interesting now that I'm looking at it here on my browser. It is Hickman related because there is this creature behind Cable who looks like one of the creatures from East of West, the like dog, horse, robot thing, you know, with like no like head, but like 4 legs. And anyway, so it's a whole other story that's not related to the Space Knight, young Cable, whatever. And it's, you know, it started with a box that says another time, another place. It doesn't say in the Age of the Crystal or, you know, whatever, but it's, you know, cute little maybe nod to that. And it's a giant like flaming lobster or crab that Cable, we think is like killing or destroying. And the second panel or second page, you just see this hulking figure that you think is a Cable. I mean, who else would it be, right? And the speech bubble is "Go to hell, old man." And then you flip, and oh my God, it's fucking old man Cable, like the real Cable, not the once and future Cable, let's call him. And so now I'm like all about this because, quite frankly, I think the young Cable, as interesting as it is, and whatever, fine. That's not my Cable. Hashtag not my Cable, right? It's fine. It's an interesting story beat, but you better go back to this. This is the original, the OG Cable. And so it's unclear, but very interesting that they are going to have both stories in these issues, and maybe they will converge at some point. And that means a lot for, you know, this Cable fan. So anyway, great book, great one-off issue. I'm all about it. The writing's solid. I think Cable has been one of those characters that has been creatively written in the last 10 years. Like, we've had some really weird interpretations. Robinson's Cable was okay. Spurrier's was interesting. Hopeless, whose name is not Hopeless now. Oh, I forgot what Dennis's new, or his actual, thank you. Yeah, his was okay. Like, we had some okay Cables, you know, and I think this Jerry already from just, and he's a fantastic writer. If you haven't read Jerry's stuff, besides Marauders, go back. I think his work on Deadpool is some of the best Deadpool in forever. And then his Guardians is also really solid. I mean, he's just done some good stuff. Anyway, he's in control of this, and I'm excited. I'm very, of all the X books besides the main X book, and then of course the forthcoming whatever crossover they're doing, this excites me the most because it's cool to see Cyclops. Cyclops is involved a little bit, and it's cool to see him interact with his dad, and all that stuff's cool, and that's there. But I'm also excited they're going to bring, if not back, they're going to bring Old Man Cable somehow into the mix. So that's also pretty exciting. So again, check it out, Phil Noto. Again, if you don't familiar with his work, he's so good, and his cartooning and whoever the colorist, I think he might color it himself. I didn't see a colorist listed, but the palette they choose for all of these different eras and whatnot is pretty awesome. So if you like Marvel, if you're a big fan of the X books, like, just get this. And, you know, I don't know, Bill, I know you're not an X-Men fan. I know you're more of a Legion guy, but Cable, I mean, you like Cable, right?
Yeah, I like Cable. I have every issue of his original run.
Perfect. Me too, right? Well, I did, and then I had to get rid of it. But you know what? So I do have a spreadsheet of all of my books. So if at any point I need to reconstitute my collection, I can do it. Mm-hmm. Just going to take a little work. But anyway, I had all of the Cable books, and yeah. Anyway.
The idea of Cable fighting dire wraiths is incredibly titillating.
All right.
So yeah, I mean, where comes the Space Knights has to come the dire wraiths, which it's interesting on that point because that property, if I'm not mistaken, is with IDW now, and IDW.
It is disputed, and I think where it's going to end up is that both Marvel and Hasbro will have intellectual property rights to something called Dire Wraiths.
Okay.
Because it was part of the ROM franchise, but it was created by Marvel for the ROM franchise. Much like when you get to the Micronauts, Hasbro cannot use Arcturus Ran or Marionette or Bug, but they can use Space Glider, they can use the Galactic Defender, they can use elements of the characters, but not the Marvel characters that were created. I think ROM operates a little differently. Actually, the big roadblock legally for ROM was the proprietary technology that was inside ROM was owned by another entity. It sounds like it was a mess to get the clearances for Hasbro to actually use the character again, but that's not interesting at all, sorry.
Oh, for somebody who's studying contracts law, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But no, what I was going to say was the bridge from Hasbro to comics is IDW. IDW has the publishing agreement with Marvel to do all of their kids books. So maybe there's a little bit of a quid pro quo there to get it jump back and forth.
There is a good relationship.
Yeah.
Between the entities, and also you have an artist edition of Micronauts coming out through IDW of Michael Golden, I think 6 issues of his 12-issue run.
I want to see Rom punch a Sentinel.
I'm just trying to think if you ever could have seen that, because there are some tie-in issues. I mean, Rom clearly operated in the Marvel Universe. And there was a time that Rick Jones was a supporting character. He crossed over into Power Man and Iron Fist and Incredible Hulk and the Thing with Marvel 2-in-1. So there are elements out there. I don't know if you'd ever got to the Sentinel, though. Anything else about Cable?
Just that I'm excited that Old Man Cable's going to be coming back, at least in some form.
I know. Ugh. My hairs are all up in attention, and I don't realize, I forget how much I miss him. I mean, that's kind of the idea, right? Take him away so you can miss him and bring him back.
So your hairs are standing up because, big beefy hairy Cable's coming back. Caleb's cockles are tickled because of Dire Wraiths possibly making an appearance. This is a whole bunch of interesting things I'm learning about you guys.
I enjoy having my cockles tickled.
All right, it's going to be one of those episodes. All right. Steve, since you sort of grabbed the mic here, why don't we go over to you with the book that you want to talk about?
Well, one of the things that I was kind of playing with the idea, because of course, the circumstances that everybody finds themselves in now, I was like, oh, maybe I should have something kind of apocalyptic, read something that's about, people dealing with a post-whatever world. And I realized that was just kind of ridiculous. So instead, I went and picked up a book I'd been meaning to read for a while, another graphic novel by Lucy Neasley called Kid Gloves, which is an autobiographical account of her, basically her history with reproduction and getting pregnant and having a baby. Which is very different than the kind of stuff that we probably normally talk about on this, on the podcast. But this book was just absolutely fantastic. It's basically it's just very honest, very emotional, very, very personal from Lucy, where she talks about her her education when she was growing up, what people talked about and the idea of reproduction. And obviously, when we're growing up, we all get the talk, or maybe not, about the birds and the bees, or we hear it from friends, or we, stumble upon some, naughty magazines, or, well, okay, I'm dating myself. So naughty websites. Interestingly enough, from like an educational standpoint, what they do teach in schools, or what even well-meaning programs teach in schools, usually really focuses on, the dangers of STIs, how not to get pregnant if you're a cis woman with a uterus, those kinds of things. But they rarely talk about how you can get pregnant, what happens when you are pregnant, and what is going to happen after the baby shows up, or what happens if the baby does not. And it's really interesting seeing it from her perspective, because she, after she got married, she and her husband decided that they were not going to try to have a baby and just sort of let things happen. And of course, the whole idea of this, and she goes through sort of her history of getting rid of her birth control device that she had implanted, and she talks about the different reactions that she's had over her life to different forms of birth control. But just taking that out, she describes it very much as that her body was kind of holding on to it as a way of sort of blocking something in her future, but removing it started her on almost a NASA style countdown for her becoming a mother, which was very much a great feeling. And she describes it so strongly about how joyous it was and how exciting and how nervous she was. And then, of course, the devastation when they lose the first baby. And so she really dives into the depression that she felt, the heartbreak that she wasn't expecting to feel, of course, the stigma around it and the myths around miscarriage and what happens when somebody loses a baby, and how people are supportive or not supportive, or the fear and loneliness that someone who's just lost their child will feel. And there's really not a lot of resources for them to turn to. And to me, that was kind of eye-opening. I never really think about this, obviously, because I'm never going to, give birth to a baby, so I don't even think about that kind of thing. But from her perspective, she was just very open and very honest about describing it. And, if you've ever seen anything from Lucy Neasley, her style is it's cartoony. She's very, a lot of it's funny, and a lot of it is, a little bit. She really magnifies the goofiness of people and features and things like that. But having that kind of art mixed with the very devastating, very depressive story about what she was going through, it's a really interesting way that she draws herself and describes herself through her art, to get the feelings across that are just very explicit and very easy to understand, which is great. And I think even for somebody who is not going to have a child, doesn't want to have a kid, this is a really great book to read, because it does talk about sort of the dark side, the downside of, trying to have a baby and what happens when that baby doesn't happen. It's a pretty long book. We're talking about 200 some pages. And yeah, it's about 200, almost 250. But she does, eventually they do have, she does get pregnant, and she talks very descriptively and shows very descriptively what happens to her body and what kind of things that she didn't know would happen. Because she never learned about that. People don't always talk about it. And there's 50 million books on the subject and, whatnot. And of course, no two pregnancies are the same. No two women are the same when they have children. So, it's very interesting describing it from her perspective, or seeing it from her perspective. And also, just for fun, she throws in a lot of historical facts and sort of like the history of reproductive care and women's health and, the idea of pregnancy and what happens in a person's body when they're pregnant and what, how that operates. And some of it's kind of eye-opening. I mean, she does it with a lot of humor, but it's also pretty awful too. I mean, for literally like 2,000, 3,000 years, people medically thought that the uterus just kind of floated around a woman's body. And whenever they were feeling sick or went a little crazy, quote unquote, i.e. hysterical, it was because the uterus was just kind of like had flown out of place somewhere. It was kind of like maybe somewhere down the leg, maybe up near the lungs, and it just needed to be, coaxed back into position or removed completely in order to solve the problem. But it is really interesting reading it and seeing her interpretation of history, and very cool. And of course, the act of actually having the baby. She talked about what happened to her because she did have preeclampsia, which, if you're a Downton Abbey fan, is what the youngest daughter did die of when she had her baby. So, of course, that was something that yes. So she goes through that and how she suffered through that. And very interestingly enough, one person that she does bring into the story, because again, it's her story, but she brings into it very frequently, is her husband John, and how he was reacting and what his feelings were. Because originally, she reveals that he didn't originally want to have children. And so having a child, or, getting to the point where they were having a child, was very interesting growth for him. And she describes that very, very nicely. But at one point when she has her baby, because it was a cesarean section and she was suffering from preeclampsia and she had several seizures and was completely unconscious for several days, she doesn't know what happened. So she actually hands basically the script over to John and has John write what was happening to him and what he was seeing and observing. And she just kind of draws it. And the way she does it is it's very black and white until their memories match up. And then they're in full color again when she becomes fully conscious and, can see her baby and sees John. Everything's back in color again. It's very cool. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here that I'm very much glossing over, but one of the lines that really gave me pause, and this was pretty close to after she described her first miscarriage, was that, and it just pretty much is something that I see a lot in autobiographical work, where the artist and the comics writer tries to really describe a point of their life and how they're writing about it in a graphic way and how they kind of want it to be interpreted. Some authors are a little bit more articulate than others, and I think she did an amazing job here. And I'll just read that real quick because I think it's a great line. When we write about our lives, it's a form of time travel. We inhabit the body we were back then, and yet we do so from our safe distance in the future. It's strange to write about this, how drawing the experience gives me sympathy for the me I was then. Space travel, time travel, biology, it's all such a mystery and wonder. And, Caleb, when you were talking about a letter to Joe, I mean, that's very similar to, I'm sure, the author was thinking when he was reading his grandfather's letters and trying to interpret that life through there. And obviously, I don't think that his grandfather was thinking about, somebody actually putting this to paper and drawing the story. But, that's why one of the reasons why I love autobiographical graphic novels so much is that you really understand how this person interprets not just this moment in their life, but themselves in that moment in life. So, but I do recommend this very much. And she also gives a great shout out to a lot of other authors, especially some, comic artists and graphic novel writers who are also parents. And she's given me several names to go and look up myself. Apparently she refers a lot to A.K. Simmons. Her book called Pregnant Butch. And then also she refers to James Kolchaka's work, sort of about himself and his family and issues. So it's very good. I recommend it. First Second has put it out. It's 2019. So if you do see it in your bookstore or your LCS, definitely pick it up if you're interested in very personal, very interesting, and maybe a little bit outside of your normal wheelhouse kind of subject matter.
Hey, Steve, have you heard of a book called Waves?
Sounds familiar.
Waves is a book by Archaea. I'm going to send you a copy because I think it's right in line with what you were with the theme of this book. Mm-hmm. And I think you'll really enjoy it.
Ooh, excellent. Well, I always appreciate things. I like gifts.
Okay, well, I'm in the same boat as Bryan in the book that I'm going to talk about. I now have to follow miscarriages and pregnancy and family issues, so And what better to follow it up with but the Justice League? Okay.
Yes.
But let me give you some background here. The books that I'm talking about are issues 40 through 42 of the current series. And if you've been following Justice League after the second series started post-Rebirth, that was in the hands of Scott Snyder and James Tynion IV as writers of that title, and it was tied into the Year of the Villain and the war with the Legion of Doom. And it was not the most streamlined, enjoyable series from my standpoint, and I think a lot of people agree with me. It has passed to the hands of Robert Venditti as the writer. It's a very temporary pass since they have announced that Cy Spurrier will become the new regular writer. But what Venditti does in these issues is makes it a Justice League team book again. And it's great to see. This storyline would not have been out of place in the 1970s when Steve Englehart was on the book with the giant size issues that they had. I loved every second of this so far, and I believe there's still one or two more issues that relate to the storyline. So what happens in this storyline, this is obviously post Year of the Villain stuff going on. And the Justice League has encountered Sodom Yat, and this is one thing I love about this, because it weaves together elements of the Superman mythos, of DC horror, of the Green Lantern Corps, and Legion. It's really nice when you see somebody other than Jeff Johns who is able to tie a lot of these strings together. And what happens is that Sodom Yat, who is a Daxamite former Green Lantern, and currently is a politician on his home planet of Daxam, crash lands on Earth. The Justice League goes to investigate, and they find out that the Eradicator, that thorn in the side of Superman in many, many incarnations, has come to Daxam, and since the Eradicator's purpose is to preserve Kryptonian legacy, Daxamites are descended from Kryptonians. He has genetically modified a big part of the population so that they are effectively Superman without a vulnerability to kryptonite. And what better place than Earth to become New Krypton, of course. So it's a very comic booky story at its core. But to battle the Eradicator, given Superman's weaknesses, apart from kryptonite, there is magic. And the Justice League Dark, unfortunately, is on a mission, so they engage Madame Xanadu, or specifically Batman engages Madame Xanadu. And Madame Xanadu doesn't exactly fall for a lot of his shit, which is really refreshing to see. And through the story, the first issue is drawn by Doug Mankey. The next two issues are drawn by Aaron Lopresti. Brian, you've remarked in the past about a DC House style. These are both artists that are within that orbit, so the handoff isn't a disruption in terms of the specific style of the book. You really don't notice it until you look at the credits, honestly. And what you have here is a really fun, old-style Justice League story. This is a threat not one single hero can combat, but the team has to combat. And you see the Justice League get their asses kicked, and you also see them kick ass. I just loved this is why I love comic books, are stories like this that don't have these far-reaching implications for continuity 17 years down the road. But to be able to tell a story that doesn't have that kind of burden and tell it as well as these three issues so far have, just a huge big thumbs up. I really wish they were giving Venditti a lot more time. I wasn't crazy about his work with Green Lantern, but I think with Hawkman he has dug into the DC universe in a lot of novel and really intelligent ways. So that's why this is my recommendation.
Well, I mean, Hawkman, what he's done with Hawkman has been incredible.
It's one of the strongest books at DC.
Oh yeah, the post-Rebirth Hawkman is great, and I hated the previous, like the New 52 Hawkman, and well, most of what they've done with Hawkman over the past 20 years. Outside of Hawk World.
There's some stuff. You didn't like Jeff Johns trying to salvage everything?
I didn't really get into it all that much.
Because I think the storyline that starts with the rebirth of Hawkman and JSA into the early issues of that book, I think those are stunning.
You know, and there's also the modern Hawkman where they brought back, oh my God, his original, the original names of the couple, you know, coming out of Blackest Night and Brightest Day, where
gosh.
they were the heart of the crystal that the Star Sapphires use as love. I mean, like, some of it was interesting, but I think what they're doing, or what Venditti was able to do by just really taking all of these crazy things that people have been throwing at Hawkman, trying to make it work for the past 50, 60 years, with some, you know, albeit some are great, some not so great, and just making it all canon and making it all make sense as canon was incredible. It's like basically what somebody probably should have done to Donna Troy a while ago, but you know, because Hawkman is really the male Donna Troy.
They're poking children for continuity issues. Absolutely.
But you know, what Venditti did to that gives me hope that somebody's going to really be able to write Donna Troy again in the future and just not fix it, but just make it work for her. Because obviously Venditti was able to do it for Hawkman, and that was, you know, we're talking about 50, 60 years worth of continuity problems. So
it wasn't that long. It was really Hawkworld that screwed everything up. And I like Hawkworld as an individual story. But man, some of that's rough. Ooh.
Well, what makes Venditti work so well is he's a modern day pulp writer. So he's taken and that's what he's doing so well in Hawkman. But you know, if you read some of the work he did with Valiant and everything else, he goes back and he looks at some of these old pulp stories and he breaks them down into kind of a skeleton, what makes them work. Like he studies the mechanics of those stories, and then he brings them back, and he has a modern sensibility about it. But I think that's what separates him from some of the other people who do these books, but they try to make them ultra modern, or they try to just do some really outlandish things with them. He keeps them rooted within their pulp DNA, but he does it in a way that makes sense in 2020. And he's one of the few people who can do that. You know, Darwin Cook, I think, could do that a little bit, but his stuff still felt very rooted in, you know, a quote unquote of a time, where Venditti is just very much now, but very much laced with that 1940s, 1950s era sci-fi lore, that fun to it.
Well, and see, that's where like bringing in the idea of Sodom Yacht. I mean, this is a guy who's had a very interesting history. Wasn't he also the core of the Sun for about a decade?
And he was also Ion for a time, was the inheritor of the Ion power, actually created by Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill, and just basically a throwaway mention in a story in an annual, and then later this new character was crafted from that. It's a very interesting character. The one thing that I thought was disappointing was one of the most interesting things regarding Daxam that was developed first in the Levitz Legion and then really spotlighted upon in Invasion was Daxams all look alike. Almost all of them look like Mon-El, who's probably the most famous Daxamite. They all look the same, and they threw that out with this iteration. And I like the idea of a culture where there is so much consistency between looks. Would you even have racism then? The types of questions that a society like that would bring about. It's not here, but maybe in some reboot they'll honor that, because I thought that was something that they really could have mined in an interesting fashion going forward.
Well, clearly the issue would be, you know, which ones are hair hoppers and which ones, you know, are clearly the dirty girls that have the cha-cha heels in Daxam.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Almost worked.
He tried.
You know, I mean, what do you do if they all look like Mon-El? I mean, you know, different hairstyles I think are going to be the way it's at. But, it is interesting. There's been – I'm trying to think the last time that Daxam's really played a role in a storyline. It must have been several years ago where they were still practically imprisoned on the planet, where they had basically, it was like a red solar shield that surrounded the planet to keep them, keep everybody else in the galaxy safe from them, but then also keep them safe from each other and depowered.
There was during the New 52 this bit about the Durlans had infiltrated Daxam, and I think because of a change in writer, they never finished that through point. I may be wrong, but that's my recollection.
Yeah, it was something about Daxam the Durlans had seeded a whole bunch of different civilizations with, sleeper agents or something.
Yeah.
I can't remember what book it was, but yeah, it didn't really go anywhere.
It was Green Lantern Corps. It was definitely Green
That's
Lantern.
what it was.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we talked about some comics, and if you were a regular listener to the Comic Book Bears podcast, you know when we transition to our final segment, it is called the Woofs of the Week segment, where we spotlight something, be it a comic book or a film or a charitable initiative, a TV program, anything under the sun that we think you, fair listener, may be interested in sampling. We will start with Caleb. We are nothing if not gracious to our guests. So, Caleb, what is your Wolf of the Week?
I've been racking my brain trying to figure out what I want to do as my Wolf of the Week. I want to start by saying it's you guys. Thank you as always for having me on the show. You always treat me wonderfully. I love being on the show. I love chit-chatting with you guys. You make me smile. And for a little bit, hopefully, just like people who are listening to this, the world kind of faded away in the background for a little bit, and it was just chatting with friends. Wow. And that's invaluable. I am going to segue into my Wolf of the Week. I'm going to take advantage of Bill's charitable initiative part on here. I am very hands-on with a nonprofit here in Little Rock called The Van. Essentially, long story short, what we do is we take donations from the community, we put it in a van, we drive around, we hand it to people who sleep outside, people who are experiencing homelessness, people who are unsheltered. Unlike a lot of organizations that purport to do things with the homelessness, we are not evangelical. We're not connected to a church. We don't ask for an ID. We're not going to ask you to pray. We're not religious. We don't turn, obviously, because I've worked with them. We don't turn away anybody who's queer, who's trans. We give people what they ask for, what they need. There's no judgment, and we have no rules. You can find out more about us if you want to at www.itsthevan.org. That's ITSTHEVAN.org. And you can see the work we're doing. And look, the work that we do started off with one guy in the back of one guy with a Toyota Yaris who took pants and handed them out to people. And so this is stuff that you can do in your neighborhood. You just gotta, it just takes some elbow grease to make it happen. So that's my Wolf of the Week. Support the group that I love and have worked with for several years, and am just constantly astounded by. And it's the tail wagging the dog, but keep listening to Comic Book Bears.
All right, thank you so much. And in terms of the work you do with the Van, Caleb, you're a very good man. Just saying that.
I work with some really good people. They make it easy.
All right, let's move over to Bryan, I guess. Bryan, what is your Wolf of the Week?
So I've been really trying to find a good charity to share for all my friends, or all of our friends in the service industry. And there's a lot out there that are trying to solicit. One that looked pretty interesting. I've never encountered them before, but the Restaurants Workers Community Foundation is a good start. It's a restaurant industry specific emergency relief fund for COVID-19. And I think that's great. The service industry, among all of the other industries that are going to suffer, are probably the most immediate and most long-term damaged industries. And having come from Orlando, and my boyfriend lived in Vegas for a while, so I spent a lot of time there. They're two cities that are incredibly reliant on the service industry. in addition to many others. So if that fund does not necessarily, you don't feel comfortable, at the very least, donate to any of the charities that you find out about online for service industry. If you want to keep it local, there's a link I can share that's got a bunch of cities, local community outreach and charities. And if you know friends in the service industry, I know one thing I saw people posting on Facebook that I liked is just, hey, so-and-so, I know you're probably struggling, or reach out and just see how they're doing. And if they need help and you can offer it, you should offer it. And in whatever way that is, whatever way you can, we need to help those people who are hurt most immediately, because, it'll affect us all if it hasn't already economically. But the service industry, they work so hard for so little and are on the absolute front lines of the economic fallout of this virus outbreak. So anything you can do to help, I plan to do as much as I can. Just look up, and I will post the link on Comic Book Bears Facebook page, and do your part if you're able.
Okay, thanks for that, Brian. Let's move over to Steve. Steve, what is your Wolf of the Week?
Well, I don't have a charitable initiative or anything like that, but if you're still looking for something, because I know a lot of people are stuck at home, either because you're self-isolating, or because you have had to be quarantined if you have actually contracted COVID-19. You might be running out of things to watch. And this also goes for people across the pond as well. I know we have some listeners in the UK. But there is a new TV series, of course I have to put that out there, from Julian Fellowes, who was the creator of Downton Abbey. It just started back earlier this week, called Belgravia, and it is very different, yet strangely similar enough to be very comforting if you are, have been missing Downton Abbey. It takes place in the mid-1800s in London, and features not just the wealthy aristocracy, but also sort of that interesting sort of wealthy middle class group of people that didn't really have a real place in English society because of the class system, because they weren't part of the peerage. And also, of course, we have a lot of the servants also represented in this. It's got a great cast. And costumes are amazing, of course, but the storyline is as riveting as Downton Abbey's was, if you are a fan of that. It is on BBC, and in the US, it's going to be aired on Starz, I believe. Sorry, no, not Starz, Epix. So if you were a fan of Pennyworth, the Alfred Pennyworth TV series, it'll be airing on that network as well, hopefully within the next couple of months.
Okay, for my Wolf of the Week, I'm going to take a host's initiative here and say I have two. Okay, the first one is very much along the lines of what Brian and Caleb had talked about. One thing that is not really being spotlighted, I think, is when you talk about area soup kitchens and other facilities that donate food to hungry families in your surrounding communities, a good portion of the food that they get comes from grocery stores. And because of the runs on grocery stores, some of these soup kitchens and similar type of operations are going to be hit pretty hard. And they already have some complications in that many of them have shut down dining halls and are still providing meals for people, but it's effectively curbside. So the soup kitchen in my area is Task, the Trenton Area Soup Kitchen. But I also encourage you to take a look at the charities that are very much similar in scope in your local area and consider donating to them. Donating food especially at this time, because the regular intake has been disrupted substantially depending upon where you live, and I think that's something that people should take a look at. And also, in terms of your listening pleasure, if you're a longtime fan of the show, you know that Chris Lavoie of the Stephanie Miller Show is a friend of the show. When the show was on Current TV, he often would wear the Comic Book Bears t-shirt, which we always appreciated. And the Stephanie Miller Show now has a section that you can donate It's the support the show section on stephaniemiller.com, and it goes to a Patreon. Now, in recent years, there have been situations where a number of advertisers have pulled away from shows like Rush Limbaugh because of controversial statements. What people don't realize is they're not just pulling away from Rush Limbaugh, they're pulling away from talk radio in general. And that also affects the progressive-minded shows. So if you want to check out the Patreon, you can also go to patreon.com/Stephanie Miller Show. There are a number of levels that you can contribute to, and it's been a great show and a great mechanism to inject a little humor into the insane political landscape that we're all part of at this point. So those are my 2 woofs of the week. So Caleb, thank you so much for joining us. It feels like all 3 of you are like right in my den here. I needed this. I don't know if you did. I just love talking to you guys about comics, and I love talking to you guys not about comics. So, so thank you over this last hour plus that we've shared. And again, Caleb, you're welcome anytime. If you didn't have your own damn show, you would be on here a lot more. So.
Well, I appreciate it, and I will come on anytime you'll have me. I can only echo exactly what you just said. I love talking about this stuff, and I love chatting with my friends. And for a little bit, it's like I said earlier, the world kind of fades into the background, and you just get it's escapism. It's what we turn to comics for. It's what we turn to pop culture for. And even if it's serious material, or the ridiculous and the obscure, it doesn't matter. It's all fun, and I like talking with you guys about this stuff. And it makes me feel like a real bear every once in a while.
And not just an appropriator of our culture.
You're a real bear.
I'm a real bear now.
A real bear.
Grr.
Well, I'm also glad to be back. I know it's been a while, and I know my life has been insane for the last year, but I finally feel like as things, even if it's like quite the opposite of my life the last year, not going anywhere at all in the world, I'm happy to settle down a bit, and I hopefully will be around a lot more often than I have been. So thanks for setting all this up and getting me dusting off my rusty podcast voice and equipment.
I have to say, Bryan, it was hell not having you be available when we did our House of X Powers of 10 episodes. I mean, it just... at some point we want to hear what you know. So,
it's that Hickman thing. I mean, you know Hickman inside and out. Not literally. That would be kind of interesting. We would definitely want to hear about that for sure.
Wouldn't that be a story, right?
Since you're a much closer follower of him than I think either Steve or myself are, personally, like, has he abandoned the kind of Charles Manson look, and is he a bit cleaner?
I haven't seen a recent picture. I did hear him on a podcast not too long ago, since this whole started, and his voice is still that luxurious Southern, maybe Appalachian. I'm not sure, Caleb. I'm probably being mildly offensive here, but his accent, his physical charm and his intellectual charm, of course, his accent is up there at the top of the list. It's like drinking a nice bourbon, Kentucky whiskey. It's all of that. Yeah.
Oh no, he's definitely colloquial. So there's nothing offensive about that. No, for some of us, it's a charm.
I 100% agree. And for being someone who has been raised and born in the South but sounds nothing like a Southern person at all, it is always a certain kind of charm. But yeah, no, I'm sorry I missed those episodes, because I definitely I'm happy overall. I'm happy.
Okay, good. All right, well, we're going to wrap this one up for good now. Again, we are the Comic Book Bears Podcast. You can find us on the Facebook as Comic Book Bears Podcast. You can find us on the Twitter and the Tumblr and the Instagram as Comic Book Bears. If you want to listen to us, you can do so by downloading us through iTunes. You can listen to us through Stitcher Radio, and you can also access us from some of the other podcatching platforms. If you want to write to us, please do so by sending an email to comicbookbears funnybookstars@gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Billy Z.
I'm Bryan Pittard.
I'm Steve Morey.
You're going to hear a woof and an explosion. We'll be back real soon. Take care, everyone, and seriously, hang in there.
Woof!